Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday Talks with Craig. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, so it's time for Tuesday Talks. And typically on Tuesdays, I just share little talks about who Jesus is and what it looks like for us to live for him, to follow him. And so this week, I'm kind of thinking a little bit about the fact that Halloween's coming up. Halloween's often sort of a fun time for kids and families. Kids often dress up and go trick-or-treating, and really it's just an excuse to go and get candy. That's what our kids would always enjoy about it. But there's always sort of this like scary, sort of frightening thing around Halloween where it's sort of this, the fear, we sort of celebrate and make fun of it. But fear is a very real thing, and Halloween just sort of exposes some of that and brings it to light. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the idea of fear and maybe a question, fear or faith. And I was thinking about just this idea of fear. Like, fear can be fun. I remember when my kids were little, and we used to play peekaboo with them. And really, the essence of peekaboo is you're trying to scare a baby or a toddler. You hide your face behind a barrier, and then you poke your head out and say, peekaboo. And the idea is to kind of frighten the child, but in a fun way, right? And often, even just recently, I've been playing peekaboo with one of my nieces whenever we get the chance to see her. And she laughs and giggles, and it's a fun thing to do, even though it's sort of built on this idea of fear. Hey, Rolf, good to have you joining me here today. Hope you're doing well. Anyways, so yeah, fear. And so as my kids have gotten older, we still have a little bit of fun with that. We're not really playing peekaboo anymore, but sometimes at night when they're brushing their teeth, getting ready for bed, I'll hide in the hallway. And when they're, on their way to their bedroom, I'll jump out from behind a door and, surprise them or say boo. And, that usually catches them by surprise and a little bit of fear. And then we usually start laughing if I don't get punched in the face first. But yeah, fear can be kind of fun. But I want you to think about maybe some of the more serious side of fear. What are some of the things that maybe make you afraid or raise your anxieties a little bit? Even just living in these COVID realities, sometimes there's just anxieties that have been going along with that. There's implications of, maybe job loss or health risk or different things going on that, make us genuinely afraid. So I want to share a little passage of scripture from the book of Mark, and I've been meeting with a few guys in a bit of a micro group, a micro life group, and the few of us meet each week. We've been going through the book of Mark recently, so they're going to, if any of them are watching it now, they might hear a little bit of what I'm going to share with them tonight from what Jesus has been speaking to me about. But in Mark chapter 6, let me just read this brief passage here. So Jesus and his disciples have been together. They just fed 5,000 people miraculously with a few loaves and fish. And right after that, it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. And he saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. And shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. So just kind of get your head around the scene here. The disciples are out in the boat. Jesus has sent them off. And then the winds start to pick up, and it says they're straining at the oars. There might have been some anxiety in the boat as the disciples are trying to make their way to the other side of the lake through this little bit of a storm. And it says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. And they cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. So again, put yourselves in the disciples' shoes. Jesus has sent them off in the boat to go to the other side of the lake. They're caught up in this storm, and then they see this guy walking on the lake. They're kind of freaked out. They're kind of terrified. And it says that they cried out. They thought that Jesus was a ghost. And then immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves, which was the scene beforehand, and it says their hearts were hardened. When I read this passage, I was reminded of another scene very similar in the book of Mark, a couple chapters earlier in Mark chapter 4, where again, Jesus, in that occasion, in Mark 4, he's in the boat with his disciples, and this big storm picks up on them, and the disciples freak out because Jesus is sleeping while this storm is circling them. And they go and wake him up, and it says that he got up and he says to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he turned to his disciples and he said, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And so these two scenes have kind of got me thinking a little bit about fear and faith and what's Jesus getting at. And I kind of was putting myself in the disciples, literally putting myself in their boat. What would they have been thinking and feeling? And were they actually afraid of Jesus, or what was going on? And so there's, a few things going on here. It says that they thought Jesus was a ghost. Were they afraid of him? Were they so caught up in the storm that their vision was clouded? Were they just so overwhelmed by the storm that they were in and the wind and the waves around them that when Jesus came by, their vision was clouded and they couldn't actually see Jesus for who he was? I wonder if that was maybe more the case than actually being scared by Jesus. In a similar kind of description in Matthew 28, it talks about when Jesus was resurrected and the women went to the tomb to go and find him, and an angel said, "It's okay, Jesus isn't here, he's risen, just like he said he would." And so the women, they hurried off to go tell the disciples, and then Jesus shows up and he says, "Greetings." And those women, when they came to Jesus, they clasped his feet and worshiped him. And again, Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." And all of this just kind of got me thinking about fear and faith and what does this all look like? And so here's just a couple of quick thoughts. I wonder sometimes if Jesus genuinely surprises us, catches us off guard, maybe to the point of, him needing to tell us, "Don't be afraid." I wonder sometimes in this current reality that we're in with COVID and the changing dynamics, in Okotoks, in our town, there's just been a mandatory mask bylaw put into effect, and so there's people talking about that. And not that people are necessarily afraid of the virus, but just all of the change around us and the uncertainty, maybe just some of the anxieties kind of surface. And I wonder sometimes if, Jesus is trying to get our attention, or if he could use these circumstances. Not that Jesus is making this happen, but in the midst of all of this, how does Jesus want to reveal himself to us? And so then I think about the disciples who are in this boat, facing the wind and the waves, and Jesus walks by and they don't recognize him, and it says that they're terrified, they're afraid of him. And I wonder if it's because they're so caught up in the storm that they're just not able to see Jesus clearly. And so all of this kind of has me thinking that, whatever's going on in our lives, whether it's related to COVID or not, but whatever it is that maybe causes fear and anxiety to surface, or whatever it is that maybe catches our attention and circles around us, like a storm, like wind and waves, and we get so focused on that, trying to, it says that the disciples were straining at the oars. They were just giving everything they had to get through this storm. And I wonder sometimes in us giving everything we have to get through whatever it is that we're getting through, that we actually miss Jesus for who he really is. We miss him wanting to reveal himself to us. Or we miss him just wanting to show up. He came to help the disciples in the middle of that storm. He saw that they were straining at the oars, and so he was walking out to them. He wanted to be with them, and they didn't recognize him. And so whatever you're going through today or these days, I want to just encourage you to don't get so focused on what you're straining at the oars to do. Don't get so focused on the task at hand. Don't get so focused on the storm around you, and that's easier said than done sometimes. But keep an eye looking out for Jesus, looking out for the fact that he is with you. He wants to be with you. He wants to reveal himself to you. He wants to show up in our lives. And sometimes he's looking for us to see him for who he really is. He kind of rebuked the disciples in the earlier passage I read in Mark chapter 4. He says, why are you so afraid? Where's your faith? Or you of little faith? And the disciples just were really struggling to grasp who Jesus really was. And I think in our day, today, on this day, my encouragement to you is to look to Jesus no matter what you're going through, to have an eye open to see him for who he really is. And I know I haven't got Jesus totally figured out. My vision is clouded all the time. And I want to allow myself, allow Jesus to reveal himself to me for who he really is. And I want him to increase my faith so that my faith can be firmly fixed in him, that my eyes can be firmly fixed on him, and that my life can be firmly rooted in him. So fear or faith, those are kind of the options. And as we approach Halloween and all the talk of fear and scariness and all that kind of stuff, maybe it's just a fun way to remind us that sometimes we get really caught up in our lives and the circumstances of our lives, and we let things kind of overtake us and overwhelm us. Jesus is there. Jesus is with you. He's with me. He's with us. He wants to reveal himself to us in new and fresh ways. So would you open your eyes to see him for who he really is, and let your faith increase as he shows up in your life. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. If you're watching this later, enjoy this little talk, and may Jesus reveal himself to you however he sees fit. May he guide us as his people, and may we choose to walk with him daily. All right, so we'll see you next week for the next Tuesday talk. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk to you later.